I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 8 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. I would ask the clerk if we have any substitutes. And could you please tell us who is in the room? We have Mr. Généreux here in the room with us and Mr. Major replacing Mr. Williamson today. Thank you very much. The committee is meeting today in the context of its study on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the government's ability to deliver information in both official languages. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. For information, just so you're aware, the webcast will always show the person who is speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. In order to ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. For those participating to the meeting virtually, members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. Before speaking, please click on the microphone icon to activate your own mic. When you're done speaking, please put your mic on mute so as to minimize any interference. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Should members need to request the floor outside of their designated time for questions, they should activate their mic and state that they have a point of order. If a member wishes to intervene on a point of order that has been raised by another member, they should use the raised hand function. This will signal to the chair your interest to speak, and we will create a speakers list. In order to do so, click on Participants at the bottom of the screen. When the list pops up, you will see next to your name that you can click Raised Hand. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. Unless there are exceptional circumstances, the use of headsets with a boom microphone is mandatory for everyone participating remotely. Should any technical issue arise, please advise the chair. Please note that we may need to suspend for a few minutes as we need to ensure that all members are able to participate fully. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. I would now like to welcome our witnesses here today. We have with us Ms. Linda Cardinal, Emeritus Professor, University of Ottawa, Dr. Stéphanie Chouinard, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, Royal Military College of Canada, and Department of Political Studies, Queen's University. We also have with us Mr. François Larocque, Professor, Faculty of Law, Common Law Section, University of Ottawa, and Mr. Martin Normand, Postdoctoral Fellow, University of Ottawa. We will hear opening statements for 7.5 minutes maximum for each witness, and I would also like to tell all participants that I will raise this yellow card to let you know when you have about 1 minute left in your speaking time, but I also have a red card, like in soccer, to tell you that your time is really up. There you have it. So to begin, I would first of all like to give the floor for opening remarks to Madame Chouinard. You have the floor, Ms. Chouinard. Go ahead, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you also to committee members, for having invited me to appear. The study you're undertaking today is important, and your work is coming at a very effervescent time, I would say, one that we haven't seen for a long time, this effervescence. With regard to official languages today, I will speak to you about two main ideas. First of all, during the pandemic, the modus operandi of the government was that because we were in an emergency situation, because we had to move quickly, official languages were suddenly less important than the central challenge, which was to protect Canadians. But we should have taken the challenge from the opposite end. It is because the main objective of governmental action is to protect Canadians that official languages should be central in its actions in a pandemic. Official languages are a tool and not an obstacle so as to ensure the best protection for Canadians. Secondly, it is because the government in a time of crisis is in autopilot that good practices must be well used and well put in place in times of peace. In other words, the COVID crisis has taught us that with regard to official languages, we must be prepared upstream. Otherwise, official languages will become secondary in an emergency situation. If the federal government set aside its linguistic obligations as of March, it is because the reflex to think about linguistic impacts with the enforcement of measures remains inadequate and in some cases even optional. Official languages must be part of this autopilot at the federal level. My colleagues and I have seen a relaxation of these federal linguistic obligations since March. Sometimes it was implicit during press conferences, for example. Sometimes it was explicit when we skirted the labeling regulations for cleaning projects, for example. Last spring, my colleague Martin Normand and myself published an article entitled Talk COVID to Me, Language Rights and Canadian Government Responses to the Pandemic. We're also working on a chapter for a book with our colleague Jean-François Savard dealing with this. Martin and I will both deal with the broad lines of our work. For my part, I'll talk to you about two elements: the daily press conferences and other traditional communications, radio, television, and our social media as well. First of all, with regard to our daily press releases, we've observed the use of both official languages, but French was sometimes present unequally. The Prime Minister also shot videos for children with Dr. Theresa Tam, and these videos were never made available in French. Then, we know that government communications in social media platforms are not very well framed because some laws, like the Official Languages Act, predate the existence of these media platforms, but they've become an important source of information for Canadians. Our analysis of the Twitter platform, for example, determined that French hadn't been used equally by the federal government. The proportion was about 79.4% for English versus 20.6% for French. Why are these observations important beyond the respect of the law? We mobilized two lenses: public safety and public health. From the public safety point of view, citizens must access clear information on measures and regulations. Many interveners spoke to Canadians during the crisis via simultaneous interpretation or captioning on digital platforms. But it's not all citizens who have the technological means to access these rebroadcasts digitally. Some would say that the bilingualism rate, English-French, is higher with francophones, and therefore francophones should understand directives given in English. Not only this excuse is anti-constitutional, but it is false, because there are still a good many unilingual francophones, especially in the elderly population, that is at greater risk. We have anecdotal proof that francophones outside of Quebec were listening to the press conferences of the Quebec government to get information in French, and they followed those directives rather than those of their own province. The non-compliance with regard to local directives could have consequences for public safety, but also legal consequences for citizens, for example, fines. With regard to public health, linguistic barriers can have deleterious effects on the health of a patient, for example, errors in diagnostics or inadequate treatment. The former Commissioner for French Services in Ontario, François Boileau, observed that these risks were higher for vulnerable members of society, namely seniors and francophone immigrants who don't master English. Overall, during a health crisis, all citizens must be able to contribute to the effort to limit the spread of the disease, and this requires the availability of all essential information in both official languages. Finally, based on these observations, what should we do? A change of mentality within the federal government is necessary with regard to its linguistic obligations, and it must go beyond the Department of Official Languages. The pandemic brought out all of the different mechanisms that the state could call into play, and no one can abandon its linguistic responsibilities. Official languages must be seen as a way of communicating with all Canadians, not as a barrier to communications. Official languages must be perceived as a way to protect Canadians and not as a nuisance. If the state must be agile in order to react quickly and effectively in a time of crisis, then it must give itself the necessary tools to react rapidly and effectively in both official languages. This is important not only because it's its obligation, but because lives are at play. In a pragmatic way, how should we go about undertaking the shift? We already knew it because it was staring at us in the face. Digital communications at the federal level must imperatively be subject to the Official Languages Act. However, communications must not stop with digital because too many Canadians rely on traditional media. We quickly realized that the Chief Health Officer in Canada, a rather obscure role for the majority of Canadians in the past, has become a central player for communication in this pandemic. This position should be designated bilingual the same way as it is for officials of Parliament or officers of Parliament. My colleague Martin will talk to you about this situation in the provinces, but the federal government should be a leader within the federation because important amounts of information on the management of the pandemic are provided by provinces. The Emergency Measures Act wasn't invoked during the pandemic, but it might be appropriate to think about it before we face a new crisis. And we have to think about how we would deploy the action plan of the government to ensure that it meets its linguistic obligations. Finally, the government is truly the champion of official languages, as it is the champion of feminism. And it must give itself tools to analyze our language policies the way we develop tools for gender-based analysis, GBA+. Thank you for your time, and I'll be ready to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chouinard. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Normand for 7.5 minutes. Please go ahead. Thank you. Chair Dubourg, committee members, thank you for this invitation to testify before your committee. While the entire country is facing a second wave of COVID-19, it is a timely moment to ensure that government linguistic obligations are being maintained and respected. I would like for you to take away two main messages from my speech. First, I will speak to you about data on provincial government communications from our recent research. Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I'm having a hard time understanding. It's possibly the microphone. Perhaps the microphone is too close. Okay, thank you, Mr. Dalton. Madam Clerk, for the technical side of things, is everything okay? Should we ask Mr. Normand to continue to be able to check? Mr. Normand, please continue for a few seconds to check if everything is working, please. Okay. Could you please try to speak a little more loudly, Mr. Normand? Yes, I will try. First, I will present some data on provincial government communications from our recent research. The verdict is clear. Communications in French have been deficient countrywide, even in jurisdictions that have more robust linguistic requirements. And this reinforces the idea that respecting the status of French was less important than protecting Canadians in the pandemic. I also believe that the scope of your study is too narrow. Official languages face many more issues than just communication. They are a transversal issue that appear in all domains of public action. Communication problems do not reflect the whole story of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Francophone minority communities. Their health and their security of these communities also rely on the development of public policies. Point of order, Mr. Chair. It's not good if the witness brings his mic close to his mouth because that's not any better, and I think it causes problems for our interpreters. Yes, thank you. Yes, Mr. Normand, could you please move your mic a little farther away? Yes, I'll try it again. I'd like to talk to you about provincial and territorial government performance. Their performance varied, even in areas that had the most robust requirements. New Brunswick is often given as an example, but despite its protections in that province, government communications since the beginning of the crisis have not been satisfactory. For example, despite the option of using simultaneous interpretation during press conferences, Premier Higgs did not avail of this service for a number of weeks, and he refused to answer questions that were asked in French. After some dithering, the Commissioner of Official Languages in New Brunswick, Shirley McLean, recommended that the Premier be accompanied by a bilingual spokesperson. During his speeches, there still has been no action to that end. In Ontario, the current directive on communications in French was established after a number of problems with communications in French during the H1N1 flu crisis. Despite that directive, up until the end of April, all daily press conferences were held in English only, without simultaneous interpretation and without a government representative to answer questions in French. Furthermore, documents given to journalists were often available in French only many hours after documentation in English. Examples of good practices have been observed in other provinces. In Prince Edward Island, the Chief Public Health Officer answers questions in French during provincial press conferences. In Alberta, the Premier has also spoken in French several times since the beginning of the pandemic. Still, this is the result of bilingual individuals in key positions and not the result of particular public policies that made French communications possible. Also, efforts in Nova Scotia, I would like to highlight efforts in Nova Scotia, which made posts on its websites on data in both languages regarding the situation of the province. However, it was not quite 50-50 French and English. Also, the Quebec public institutions had no obligation to give communications in English under the Charter, but they did show a great capacity to do so. These actions showed that a government can show good faith towards its linguistic minority, even if there are no binding rules. Furthermore, the Quebec Secretariat of Canadian Relations published a special edition of its Quebec COVID Guide for Francophones outside of Quebec. Robust linguistic requirements are not sufficient to ensure effective communications with OLMCs, which always have to count on individuals' political will and leadership. Any measures to rectify communication problems will not be enough if individuals do not take government linguistic requirements seriously. Secondly, it's in communications that slacking on linguistic obligations by governments has been the most visible. You are dedicating your current work to this, as the Commissioner of Official Languages did in his recent report. I believe that your scope is too narrow. Official languages cannot be reduced to communications. Consideration of official languages must occur in all domains and at all stages of public action. Let's take the example of decisions made last spring by Health Canada regarding labels on cleaning and disinfecting products. That was not just a communication problem, but a decision-making process problem in a decision on public policy within the institution. Health Canada, don't forget, authorized distribution and sales of a product without labeling, or rather with labeling only in English. After much criticism, the policy was revised to include a middle ground solution where extra information in French had to be posted near the products. First of all, the reflex to think of a solution, a middle ground rather, solution, had not been integrated in the decision-making process. And this points to a gap in the consideration of official language upstream of the decision. But even that solution was inadequate. I myself saw problems with health product labeling. and I painstakingly managed to file a complaint. However, 4 months after I filed my complaint, this product that I complained about is still being sold on shelves, and I have had no news from Health Canada except that they told me my complaint would be investigated. This solution seems to be poorly adapted, poorly thought out, and difficult to execute. That is but one example that illustrates that the protection and promotion of official languages must be integrated at all stages of public action. And if institutions take the requirement, and institutions must take the requirements seriously. While government institutions are innovating in a crisis, they could integrate their linguistic requirements in the mix instead of treating these requirements as a nuisance. Rural francophones are often isolated or an extreme minority, and they would surely appreciate being consulted. If improvements are made as a direct result of this pandemic, many people would celebrate this. Thank you very much, Mr. Normand. Now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Cardinal. Please go ahead and turn on your mic. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you for having invited me to speak in your proceedings, members of Parliament. Today I would like to talk to you about something that goes hand in hand with the work of my colleague, Mr. Larocque.
Cardinal, Monsieur Major, yes.
The volume's at the same level as her voice, whether the translation, she's got to pick French, I guess, or...
Right. Oui, she's speaking in French. Madame la greffière, est-ce que vous pouvez vérifier avec les techniciens?
Could you please check with the technicians, Ms. Cardinal, to fix this problem?
Est-ce que je poursuis?
Should I continue?
Désolée.
Hello, Ms. Cardinal. I'm just doing a check. Could you please check on Zoom, under interpretation, which language is selected? French. Is that better?
D'accord.
Merci.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Cardinal. Please go ahead. You can go ahead. Thank you. I was saying that my presentation goes hand in hand with the presentation of my colleague, François Larocque. You just heard two presentations about research results. But today we will be speaking to you about a very complementary research project, which goes hand in hand with what was just presented, but that also touches on official languages in a pandemic, and we took a more legal angle. We also focused more on the way official languages are represented. The project I would like to speak to you about today is our project, which was funded by the Canadian Social Science Fund. Our main partner in this research is the Federation of Acadian and Francophone Communities of Canada.
So today I wish to give you the broad outline of this research project, its objectives, because we thought it might interest you, especially our research work might feed your discussion, feed into it. To respond to your first question, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the government's ability to deliver information in both official languages, well, our work, contrary to that of Martin Normand, doesn't just deal with communication. We are delving more into the issues behind bilingual labeling. I would begin by the conclusion. It'll be simpler, because if I don't have time to finish, at least you'll have the conclusion. So there are two important messages in the context of what I'm outlining for you here today. First of all, the key role of research on official languages. We see that the management of the crisis at present in the area of official languages wasn't based on existing research work in the area of official languages dealing with public interventions in healthcare. For a long time, researchers have been saying that language is a health and safety issue. In my work, I've stated this often. We have broad expertise in Canada at the Institut du Savoir Montfort with researchers who underscored that dimension of language policies over several years, as a matter of fact. So this is a first message and an observation at the same time. A second message is a hypothesis. At the heart of our work, the hypothesis is that the government's action, the Canadian government's action in the area of official languages in a pandemic concept, is seeing language as an element of one's identity. It's true, the language is a vector of one's identity, confirmed by the Supreme Court. But since 1992, it is also an element of citizenship. We say that language is a fundamental right of Canadian society. When we make that statement, that it's a fundamental right, we're not just limiting language to identity issues, identitary factors. We say that it's key to one's citizenship, therefore one's inclusion with regard to the teaching of another language, with regard to schooling, training, work, and health. Language is an essential ingredient. This is why we've often said in the media that Francophones were treated as second-class citizens. Why? Because behind the representation of language which guided the federal government's action, there was a conception that was probably narrow. My colleague, Mr. Larocque, will be able to talk to you about that a little later. Our research produced that conclusion, and we give the context. So I'll cover this quickly. I'll tell you a little bit about our objectives and our expected results. So the context. I won't recall all of the amends that have already been mentioned by my colleagues, but clearly we must go back to March and May. In March, the Canadian government decided to withdraw from the requirement for bilingual labeling for cleaning products, not just once but twice, saying that French is an identity issue and it's unfortunate. We're in an emergency situation, so here we are. This is what we heard from our Prime Minister. And secondly, after repeated representations and after a second announcement, once again, we heard our Prime Minister finally say that he considered that language, it too, was a health and safety issue, public health and safety issue. My colleague and myself wrote letters to the media, wrote articles to reinforce this idea, such that measures were taken. But as my colleague Martin Normand underscored, these are measures that we're having difficulty seeing results of concretely. So our conclusions that led to our research project very quickly, the absence of a Francophone lens within the federal government, especially with regard to emergency measures, the existing frameworks guiding the government's action in areas of emergencies and official languages are not covered by the Official Languages Act. We saw a lack of sympathy towards French in this crisis, an absence of conclusions drawn from research to guide the government's action, a very shy, timid recognition on the part of the Prime Minister that language is an element of public health and safety. So we took up this analysis to go ahead with a scientific research paper. We want to study language in crisis situations, calling upon political and governmental players in the 12 departments that were involved. So I'll stop there. As you know, you already have my conclusion. I thank you for your attention. I'd be delighted to respond to your questions and comments. And I'll give the floor now to my colleague François Larocque to talk to you in greater depth about the legal ramifications of our work. Thank you, Ms. Cardinal. Indeed, I now give the floor to your colleague, Mr. Larocque. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, honorable members of the committee, for this invitation. I believe that I have the benefit, speaking last, to be more concise, because many of the topics I wanted to raise have already been outlined. So that is excellent. We'll be able to devote greater time to our discussion. And I think it's my MP, Marie-France Lalonde, earlier, who stated that during the period waiting for the beginning of our meeting, one of the big key sentences of the year will be, excuse me, sir, your mic is on mute.
Le micro est en sourdine. Oui.
Indeed. And I think a second key slogan for the year will be, one should never waste a good opportunity, a good crisis.
Je ne devrais jamais gaspiller une bonne crise. Voilà.
And I'm speaking at the same time as the interpreter. So the perils of interpreting or translating oneself. What I was saying is that we shouldn't waste a good crisis. And one of our lessons through this pandemic is, I believe, this, as colleagues have previously said, official languages are indissociable from health and safety, public health and safety. You can't dissociate them. They're part and parcel of one and the same thing. The government of Canada reacted to the pandemic, and the commissioner stated that it's a matter of respect and safety. It's included in the title of his report. The report is entitled A Matter of Respect and Safety. And it's also, in my opinion, a matter of primacy of the law. This is what is at play. The law is the Official Languages Act, and the linguistic rights must always guide the actions of the government, and they're outlined in the Act. And this is especially the case, or even more so the case, when we're in a crisis situation. So our research, my colleagues Chouinard, Normand, and Linda Cardinal, we're all looking at various facets of this reality, of this taking into account of official languages in governmental action. I believe that, legally speaking, the additional dimension we can add is taking into account of official languages in the intervention plans and in the drafting of legislation. One of the opportunities we have before us is this. We're modernizing the Official Languages Act. And therefore, in this modernization exercise, we must act and draw lessons from this pandemic. And we must see what we might add to this quasi-constitutional act. As my colleague Stephanie Chouinard mentioned, the Emergency Measures Act was not invoked during the pandemic. However, it is important to underscore the fact that in its preamble, the Emergency Measures Act, had it been invoked, is silent with regard to the issue of official languages. It says that the Emergency Measures Act and measures taken under it must be guided by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which includes linguistic rights, of course. But it is silent on the Official Languages Act, whereas it does make mention of the International Pact on Civil and Political Rights. Very important, too, I agree. But in our view, it would be important to make an explicit mention of the Official Languages Act. Both emergency acts with regard to COVID, that of March and that of April, that were adopted by Parliament, are also silent on official languages, the Official Languages Act. These two acts authorize the Department of Health, the Minister of Health, and the Government Council to pass acts that would allow the government to withdraw from its linguistic requirements, obligations with regard, namely, to labeling. So I believe, without anticipating on the conclusions of the study that my colleague Ms. Cardinal and I are undertaking, one of the obvious conclusions is that the Official Languages Act must be amended in order to include the lessons drawn from the pandemic. So there must be an explicit mention in the Emergency Measures Act of the fact that the Official Languages Act must apply in crisis situations, even when the Emergency Measures Act is invoked, and the Official Languages Act itself must include provisions, reminders that it applies and that it takes priority over other laws, and that it also applies in times of crises, and that all government action must imperatively take into account the provisions of the Official Languages Act. And I believe it would be important, in the very concrete light of the lessons with regard to bilingual labeling. This was a massive error that was made, to my mind, by allowing the importation of dangerous products with unilingual English-only labels. And perhaps we should think about including in the Official Languages Act provisions dealing with bilingual labeling and packaging. At present, these provisions are framed not in an act, but in regulations. Regulations on, what is it called? The regulations on consumer product labeling and packaging, consumer goods packaging and labeling, and the labeling for drugs and food, which is logical. Those bilingual labeling provisions are based on rules, regulations, and therefore the Government Council can more easily suspend their application, whereas if they were included in the Act, it would be much trickier, and the framing would be trickier to circumvent. So that is what I wanted to outline for you, and I now am ready to answer your questions or comments. Thank you, Mr. Larocque. Thank you to our four witnesses for their excellent presentations, opening statements, and now we will undertake our discussion, our question period with MPs, members of the committee. So the four following members will each have 6 minutes to put their questions, and I would ask them as well to indicate to whom their question is addressed. So I'll have Mr. Généreux, Madame Latancio, Monsieur Beaulieu, and Ms. Ashton. So we'll begin with Mr. Généreux, who is here in the room. You have the floor, Mr. Généreux, for the 6 next minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Listen, I'm flabbergasted by your words. We've seen various communication difficulties throughout the course of the summer, since the beginning of the pandemic, in fact. Indeed, we were all able to observe this, but I believe that the main issue in what you've outlined, and I'm thinking here of what Ms. Chouinard stated, is that it's fundamental after 52 years with the Official Languages Act. Yet today there is no reflex here in Ottawa with regard to respecting the integrity of the Official Languages Act, the equality between English and French. That is what's happening, and it's just hit us in the face over the last few months. You were very explicit with regard to the reflex aspect. When you talk about a government reflex, this is something that should be part and parcel of the way of seeing things, of thinking, and I'll allow you, if I'll ask you to allow me to read something. Here we go.
Every year on November 11th, it's an occasion for veterans, for remembrance. Now, how can I put this? It's so abhorrent. Last November 11th, the veterans tweeted to receive an 1111 call. This is in French. I'm reading this out in French. It's very bad quality French. There are spelling mistakes. with survival spelled wrong and then sacrifices for our liberties. Okay, so we know that Veterans and Remembrance Day is not a crisis. It's not an emergency. It's something that happens year after year. But after 52 years of the Official Languages Act in Canada, we still see this kind of tweet. And I'm sure this is a Googled translation. I don't know what kind of machine translation it came out of, but it's absolutely flabbergasting to see that sort of thing. Another thing that surprises me from your comments, especially you, Ms. Chouinard, is that this reflex has never been developed. So much so that here we are today, and there's an automatic and systemic respect in a crisis or not in a crisis. As I said, the crisis hit us square in the face when it came to the lack of respect for the French language, and the health and safety for Canadians is at risk because that reflex has not been developed. Do you have or do you see some sort of explanation anywhere for the fact that we're here today with this situation, both in crisis and in peaceful times? Dr. Chouinard. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. That is a huge question you're asking. One of the answers is that, and there have been decades of people saying this before me, is that within the federal government, the tendency is to think of official languages separately, as a separate entity, as only the responsibility of one department and not of all departments. And I think many speeches we've heard today show that different arms of the government have needed to activate, including Health Canada. And Health Canada is one of the departments that hasn't developed this reflex because this department doesn't consider it to be their responsibility. So a horizontal structure needs to be developed in developing communications and public policies. And this must be done before a crisis strikes, because before March, something that was considered extraneous became crucial in the crisis. And this is something that we have seen since the beginning of the pandemic. So that is one aspect that I could give you as an answer, among many other aspects. So I think it's necessary to develop a horizontal reflex that are attached to all departments in the structure. Thank you, Ms. Chouinard. Ms. Cardinal and Mr. Larocque, your study seems very conclusive already, but I have a question for you. After this study, or the analysis that you're carrying out, that you've already developed part of the conclusion for, when it comes to French Canadians, did you find that some French Canadians felt that they were poorly served or even in danger because of different situations they experienced? Do you think that there could be a class action suit against the government because the official languages were not respected in the services that these people received? 30 seconds left. 30 seconds of time are left. Go ahead. Mr. Larocque, could you reply, please? Yes, if I understand the question, is that could there be class action suit by Francophones? In my opinion, that would be in support of the FCFA that would then carry out steps on behalf of people and then represent them to better respect language rights. Thank you, Mr. Larocque. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. I will now give the floor to Ms. Lattanzio for the next 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Welcome to all of you. My question is for Mr. Larocque. Thank you very much for your explanation. I'm very interested in what you were saying about how if we change the bylaws, that would be less effective because this requirement would be less protective, this requirement to have communications in both languages. And you also said in your diagnosis that what should be done is to modify the law itself. So here's my question. What type of legal mechanism do you think we should be used on the Official Languages Act? Go ahead, Mr. Larocque. Thank you for your question, Ms. Lattanzio. An excellent question. In fact, I hope our study will identify a few avenues for solution. First of all, what the FCSA is expecting to do is to propose wording to the government to modify the OLA. I'm not sure what exact form that wording will take, but that's what we will look into with our study through interviews that we will carry out in the coming weeks. One idea that I have presently is to include an article or two, a section or two rather, in the OLA that would either add more structure or would refer specifically to bilingual packaging and labeling. It's very important for rules to exist on official languages, including on packaging and drugs and food and labeling. It's very important for this to be included in the rules. But the rules are fragile because they can be infringed upon more easily if without the backing of Parliament. However, if these rules were included in the law, the whole of Parliament would modify and would vote on it. So this is how we think that rules could be more robust regarding bilingual labeling. And that may be the way that the FCFA will go on this. Ms. Lattanzio. And when will your studies be completed? We have 1 year to complete them. And we're already sending out invitations, so don't be surprised if you hear tell of us in the coming weeks. Thank you. My next question will be for Dr. Chouinard.
So the pandemic, of course, we've said it this afternoon, and we all understand that it's had dire consequences on the health and economic situation of Canadians, but also and unfortunately on their safety and security. And we've had the Commissioner of the Official Languages report filed with us, and it was entitled A Matter of Respect and Safety, the Impact of Emergency Situations on Official Languages. Mr. Theberge stated quite clearly that there was a lack of vital COVID-19 information distributed for the English and French minority language communities across our country. The report also found that the Canadians had a hard time making the distinction between federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal areas of responsibility as they relate to the language of service. They see it as it was perceived as being confusing, blurred, and immaterial. So, in your opinion, do you have any suggestions as to how to better foster communication and cooperation between the various levels of government? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lattanzio. One of the things that that Martin and I actually noticed in our research is that the Quebec government actually took up some of the gap in the information in French language for official language minorities outside of Quebec at some point when the Quebec government published the COVID guide in French. The Secrétariat québécois aux affaires canadiennes decided to actually publish an outside of Quebec version of this guide for francophones outside of Quebec. So that was a very interesting development from our end. And they actually published this outside of Quebec guide before they published their own COVID guide in English, which was obviously something that was fulfilled a few weeks later. The blurriness between the jurisdictions is something that happens, notwithstanding at times of crisis. This is something that we notice in our own classrooms as political scientists, and maybe in a sense, the federal government could be a leader in trying to standardize some of the messages and some of the information that was conveyed to Canadians, especially at the onset of the crisis, when there were so many press conferences every day, where I think there was a bit of an information overload at the beginning. And I'm going to stop here.
Thank you so much. Et la prochaine ronde de questions.
The next round of questions will be for Mr. Beaulieu for the next 6 minutes. Please go ahead. Hello, thank you. These were very interesting presentations and gave us more concrete solutions for modifying the Official Languages Act and adding measures for emergency situations and so forth. Like my colleague Mr. Généreux earlier, what I'm noticing is that after 51 years of the Official Languages Act, and the Commissioner has once again sounded the alarm that policies are not integrated. And I'm wondering if it's the underlying measure that isn't working, because for 51 years, we've seen that there's a rate of anglicization, of assimilating Francophones outside of Quebec that are being more and more assimilated into the Anglophone majority. So French spoken outside of Quebec is in decline. And when it comes to bilingualism, we see that bilingualism in Canada takes place mostly in Quebec. Outside of Quebec, 85% of Francophones are bilingual, and only 7% of Anglophones outside of Quebec are. In Quebec, Francophones are increasingly bilingual, 40% now. Between 2001 and 2016, rather, it went from 36% to 40% for Francophones becoming bilingual. And now Anglophones are 69% of them are bilingual within Quebec. So we do see that there is a decline. And for Statistics Canada's projections, we see that they expect no progress in bilingualism outside of Quebec for Anglophone speakers. So, from the very principle of the Official Languages Act, which is based on institutional bilingualism and on individual rights, that is the case. But protection rules are more based on jurisdictions between provinces and territories. Do you think that improvements will be possible if there are not more in-depth changes to the Official Languages Act? Who do you wish to put your question to? To whomsoever wishes to reply. Perhaps Ms. Cardinal? Go ahead, Ms. Cardinal. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu, for your question. I think that is a big question and very relevant. You're asking if the model could be used, or rather, inaudible for the interpreter. In fact, I would say it's a governance model. Many people, even in the House of Commons, many researchers and Canadians were not even aware that the Official Languages Act did not have the strength to guide the government's action in the pandemic. I think it was a discovery for many people that it is not the Official Languages Act that that made it so that we have bilingual labels on disinfecting products, etc. It's another law. I think Canadians were also surprised that there's the Official Languages Act, but that it wasn't aligned with the response plan. So there should be more harmony between rules and laws, as my colleagues said. And Martin Normand, my colleague, said that when he filed a complaint, it didn't go to the Commissioner of Official Languages. It went to Health Canada for those labels on those products. But it didn't fall under the purview of the Commissioner of Official Languages office. There is a mechanism that was not implemented to ensure that official languages don't become obsolete.
Ils ont fait l'analyse en matière de langues officielles en se disant, bien, là, on va soustraire des produits de l'étiquetage bilingue. Est-ce que ça contrevient à la loi sur les langues officielles? Ah, là, ils ont coché leur liste, puis ils ont dit non, peut-être. C'est ce que les entretiens vont nous aider à voir. C'est une hypothèse. Et là, du coup, ben...
What I'm outlining here is just a hypothesis, but if it doesn't have an impact on the Official Languages Act, then we can move forward. And you hold a press conference and the Prime Minister says, well, official languages are important for identity. Does that mean it's not important for our health and public safety? Is it just important for identity? A lot of people believe that the emphasis is on identity under the Official Languages Act, but if you look at the Charter, the Official Languages Act is a matter of citizenship. And I think there's an important meshing to be done with regard to the governance of official languages. Thank you, Mr. Bourdieu. Forgive me, your 6 minutes are up, so you'll be able to come back a little later. I would now like to give the floor to Ms. Ashton for 6 minutes, please. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to begin by thanking all of our witnesses for their testimony. Very information-packed in this tricky situation that we are experiencing. My first question is for Ms. Cardinal. You said that the government's actions put in the spotlight the fact that English is the main language for communication and that we can sacrifice French for purposes of speed. You stated that unilingualism is tied in with effectiveness. Capable people are all Anglophones in the minds of some people. I believe you're right. The Commissioner for Official Languages stated similar things. He even said that had the Act been modernized and reinforced, we could have avoided a lot of the problems that were exposed throughout the crisis. I would like to ask you if you believe that it is urgent to modernize the Official Languages Act. Thank you very much for your question. You know, there's a lot of research internationally on the impact of the absence of taking into account minority languages in emergency situations. And we might think that it's easier to relay information in one language, that it's more effective, but you note after the fact it's not necessarily the case. People also say, well, Francophones are all bilingual, so we can just deliver messages in English. But people will say there are unilingual Francophones who don't understand English, and my colleague, Mr. Larocque, mentioned this and stated that it's a matter of law, legal rights. We're a bilingual country with 2 official languages. When the Prime Minister sanctions a measure, authorizes an emergency measure to make things go forward more quickly, well, it's an ability, it's an additional ability we have when we're bilingual. It shouldn't prevent us from having access to services in French, and it shouldn't negate the requirement to take into account official languages. In our research work, given that we're working in partnership with the Federation of Francophone and Acadian Communities of Canada, we think it's an opportune time. It's ripe. It's an opportune time, and we must seize this opportunity to modernize the Official Languages Act. There's a white paper that's being prepared, and now would be a good time to bring these questions forward in the debate underway on official languages. As we underlined earlier, it's an opportunity, an ideal opportunity to ensure that there is a proper meshing between the Official Languages Act and the other aspects of our governmental and legal frameworks to ensure that in times of crisis, of public safety crises, the Official Languages Act comes into play. Canadians are entitled to service in the language of their choice. And this mustn't be forgotten and mustn't fall by the wayside. Yes, thank you very much for your answer. My next question is for all witnesses. This week, the government stated that it wanted to present a white paper on the modernization of the Official Languages Act. We know that despite this promise that it was going to modernize the Official Languages Act, this is a new initiative. What do you think of the delay with regard to the difficulties that we've experienced through this pandemic crisis? I don't know who would like to begin. I don't know if we're to raise our hands or... Well, go ahead, Mr. Larocque. Well, listen, thank you for your questions, Ms. Ashton. And I would add on to what Ms. Cardinal said. It's urgent that the Official Languages Act be modernized. It's all the more so the case that we must draw lessons from the pandemic. The white paper, you have 4 university professors before you who will be delighted to study this. It's like a Christmas present, but it doesn't put off the fact that it's imperative that we modernize this act. The process has been underway for a long time. There have been consultations, studies. All this work has been done. So I am those who believe that a white paper, fine, thank you very much, but that shouldn't postpone the modernization of the act. Ms. Ashton, you have 30 seconds left. Well, I would like to invite other witnesses, if Ms. Chouinard or someone else would like to respond. Yes, very quickly. If I understood Ms. Jolie's intention, the white paper will deal with official languages, but not just the Official Languages Act. So I'm waiting to see what else is going to be covered by this white paper, because the Official Languages Act, we've been talking about it for a long time. Thank you very much. We now move to Mr. Dalton for the next 5 minutes. Go ahead, please, Mr. Dalton. You have the floor. Thank you. Thank you to all the witnesses for your presentations. It was very interesting. Madame Chouinard, you stated several things. Your whole presentation was very interesting, but I wanted to come back to a few terms you used. You stated that the Official Languages Act should be a tool and not an obstacle to serve Canadians. You said that it must be seen as a means to protect and not be viewed as a problem. And I know that Mr. Larocque also said that we shouldn't waste a good crisis and the opportunity it presents. I also wanted to go back to Ms. Tam's videos. They weren't translated. There were issues there, Ms. Theresa Tam's videos. And you also mentioned the fact that the Chief Public Health Officer should be bilingual, that it should be a designated bilingual position. And you talked about a good many unilingual francophones Many of them belong to vulnerable populations, vulnerable groups, new immigrants and seniors. And you stated that this can cause safety and security problems in the context of a crisis like the one we're experiencing today. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to perhaps add to those comments. Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Yes, indeed. Very quickly, if I may. If I may add to what I stated, what I meant is that we can't purport to protect the population that you don't serve in its official language. No, not only does that population have that right, but it has that expectation. And it's imperative. It's the responsibility of the government to be able to carry out this mission. We sometimes believe that you're more effective when you move more quickly and you circumvent translation or the provision of the same information in both official languages, but it can have the contrary effect. I gave you a few examples very quickly. You can have a population that doesn't really understand what the government is expecting of it because the directives were not clear. You can have a group of people that might be hesitant to use healthcare services because it has not understood the directives. And it's true, studies have shown this, for seniors who aren't convinced that they'll be served in their own language because, for example, as you grow old, your cognitive abilities in your second language might weaken. You might have hearing issues as well. If we're talking about seniors beyond a certain age, immigrants are not as familiar with the healthcare system, so they too might hesitate to call upon services. Those are all sorts of elements that are behind this imperative that directives be clear in both official languages. With regard to the issue of the chief public health officer, what we saw as citizens is that this individual, we didn't know her very well before this position, before the pandemic. Well, we weren't familiar with it, but it becomes central with the pandemic for citizens and behind the scenes. So this is why I'm saying that this position should be designated bilingual, because this role is essential. The person filling that role must be able to communicate with stakeholders, interveners in the official language of their choice. So I think I'll stop there. I think that completes what I said in my opening remarks. Listen, I don't have much time. Perhaps we could hear other witnesses. Mr. Larocque, would you like to add something? In 30 seconds, please, Mr. Larocque, if you wish. I was muted. I was on mute. I have 15 seconds left. I might ask others if they have any other elements to add, but I think Ms. Chouinard really outlined important things. Thank you very much, Mr. Dalton. We're going to move on. We now have Mr. Duguid for 5 minutes. Terry, you have the floor.
Thank you to our guests for excellent presentations this afternoon. A number of our speakers today have mentioned the word and emphasized the word being proactive, and I couldn't agree more. And while we are in the middle of a pandemic of a magnitude we haven't seen in a century, we know that there are floods, there are ice storms, there are other disasters coming our way. In Manitoba, where I live, there's many southern Manitoba communities that are either entirely or majority Francophone, and I don't think they're getting the information they need during these very, very difficult times. In his report, the commissioner recommended that one option for enhancing the federal government's ability to respond to the act would be the establishment of an expedited translation service for emergency or crisis situations. Again, this entity could be ramped up quickly and then could be ramped down quickly, depending on the situation. I wonder if any of our speakers would have a perspective on that.
from the perspective of someone who works for the federal government, because I work at Royal Military College, and I know what translation may look like, and I know how long it can take in the federal civil service. I think the Official Languages Commissioner's idea is very great, and it could definitely serve in time of pandemic or different types of crises like floods. But generally speaking, translation services could be enhanced across the board in the federal civil service outside of pandemics.
Okay.
I would add as well that Canada is blessed with probably some of the best translators in the world, and to mobilize them in an emergency, I think just makes common sense, and to increase their own capacity to function and deliver their work to the federal government is, I think, a crucially important idea. But again, it requires, I would think, amendments to the Official Languages Act to include sections on emergencies, so that that imperative be made crystal clear in the Act.
Okay, I'm not sure how much time I have, but maybe a comment, a last comment, and a response from those of you who want to respond. I'm from Manitoba. Majority English, of course. All of the daily briefings, as someone has noted, have been in English. Even Radio Canada asks their questions in English, which is interesting. And I'm very, very concerned that the Franco-Manitoban community is not being served well. It has implications for the health and safety of those who speak French, and often it's their only language. We have personal care homes, which are entirely French. We have a hospital, St. Boniface Hospital, which is French in nature. But we have a limited jurisdiction as a federal government. And I wonder if any of you would have any comments on that, because we can only go sometimes where the provincial government will allow those kinds of partnership. And some of our provincial governments are focused on austerity and not expanding services, but contracting them. So a comment from any one of you.
If I may, I would like to thank you for your question, Mr. Duguid. What's important to understand here is that official languages shouldn't be a question of austerity or not. There should be a service budget, and it should be understood that the service budget is for both languages. And of course, in this case, what we're after is getting the widest range of services possible, even where jurisdictions might not be so robust. With that said, the federal government has a role to play, and that is to lead by example. The federal government has linguistic requirements, and if in spite of those, it doesn't manage to reach that minimum performance of what it needs to do to respect the law, provinces might take that as an example and believe that they have also got the freedom to do as they wish when it comes to official languages. So yes, the power to act within a government is limited, but the federal government must lead by example, because this could motivate provincial governments to be more generous and proactive. Thank you very much. I agree. Thank you, Mr. Duguid. I will now give the floor to Mr. Beaulieu for 2.5 minutes. Over to you, Mr. Beaulieu. I would like to come back to Ms. Cardinal's answer from earlier. What I understood from that was that she was saying the following. Services during the pandemic were first and foremost a question of governance. So if the linguistic model is not changed, and if the decline of French continues in and outside of Quebec, there could still be more services given to minority communities if the governance were improved. I have a question. Recently, I read one of her articles, and I would like to ask her if she still believes the same thing. She said that Quebec is the only French state in North America. The chances of its survival will depend on either the creation of a sovereign Francophone state or on the federal government giving a larger place to that territory. I would like to know if the witness still believes that, and could you tell us more about how this applies to the current discussion? Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. First, I'll answer your first question. I wasn't speaking about the type of linguistic measures behind the Canadian model, because in the current case, which concerns crisis management, this is a matter of governance because in all contexts you have the Official Languages Act and you have other laws, whether you be at the provincial level or otherwise. The existing laws will not necessarily improve the situation. It is rather the fact that these laws are not properly tied together. That is the issue. And that is why I brought up governance. It seems that the Official Languages Act is on the one side, then there are the other laws, and that there's not enough communication between the two. Mr. Beaulieu, I agree with you. But if there are fewer bilingual people, fewer Anglophones who speak French, and fewer Francophones, full stop, it will be difficult to carry that out in reality. Excuse me, Miss Cardinal. I just had to let Mr. Beaulieu know that his time was up, but he will be able to participate in the next round of questions. 2.5 minutes go by very quickly. Ms. Ashton, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I would like to take this opportunity to table a notice of motion, first of all. Mr. Chair, I would like to table the following notice of motion so that it can be debated at our next meeting of committee business, that the committee invite the Minister of Official Languages to appear for her to apprise the committee of her mandate letter, especially when it comes to the modernization of the OLA, and to ensure that Air Canada provide fully bilingual service to its clients and to strengthen the powers of the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages. Thank you. I would now like to take advantage of my time to share something that is very important to me personally and politically. Yesterday was the International Day for the Eradication of Violence Against Women, and I think that it's necessary for the committee to speak to this, to put aside our political alliances, and to say that on November 20th, the caricature of the member for Saint Laurent was unacceptable. Violence against women is a serious scourge that kills thousands of people in Canada and across the world. So I would like to table this motion. While respecting freedom of the press and freedom of expression, the committee recognizes that despite political differences between MPs, debates must be respectful. And the committee denounces misogyny and violence against women in all of its form, and speaks out against and denounces the caricature from November 20th, where the member for Saint Laurent is a victim of violence. Mr. Chair, I'm asking for the committee's unanimous consent to immediately debate and quickly adopt this very clear motion.
Merci, Madame Ashton.
Thank you, Ms. Ashton. First, I will deal with the first motion that you tabled to be debated at the next sitting. However, Ms. Ashton, you know that according to the Board of Internal Economy, when a motion is tabled, it takes 48 hours before the committee can hold a committee business meeting to debate that motion. Ms. Ashton, Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I also requested unanimous consent. And that is the way that I would like to make this request. Ms. Lalonde, Point of order. Point of order. Mr. Chair, I will be suspending the sitting for a few moments and I will be back shortly. Thank you.
opening our meeting. Ms. Ashton. You have but 30 seconds remaining in the time allotted to you, but I would like to tell you that, yes, your first motion is a notice of motion, but the second motion requests unanimous consent to pursue. So, question to the committee. Does the committee consent to our debating Ms. Ashton's motion? We need unanimous consent. Might we have the written text of the motion? But first, on a point of order, Ms. Lalonde. I sent it while I had the floor, said Ms. Ashton. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With all due respect for my colleague, with regard to her notice of motion, Ms. Ashton, I would like to see text of the motion in both official languages, the first one. And with regard to the second motion, we have witnesses before us, and we are indeed studying the pandemic and the fact that even in Manitoba, there are gaps with regard to the French language. And I believe this is very important. And without denigrating what you're saying, Ms. Ashton, please understand that I would like us to go back to our witnesses who took the time with very little notice to be with us this afternoon, dear Chairman. So I'd like us to go back to them. Thank you, Ms. Lalonde. So my question for you is this. Is there unanimous consent or not on the part of the committee to debate Ms. Ashton's motion? People are saying no. So thank you. There is no unanimous consent. Ms. Ashton, you have 30 seconds left in your time, so go ahead, please. With all due respect to Ms. Lalonde, it is my right as a member of the committee to propose something that is so important, that deals with something that is a matter of life and death for women. And I would say, with all due respect to all members of the committee, this is an issue that is of concern to all of us, and I'm really very disappointed by this response. Thank you, Ms. Ashton. And now for the 5 next minutes, I have the Vice Chair. Point of order, forgive me. Yes, a point of order, yes. Very quickly. The second motion of Ms. Ashton, is it being presented as a notice of motion for the next meeting? Yes, absolutely. Mr. Blaney, you have the floor. Thank you very much. And we will indeed be able to debate these motions in committee. They're very interesting motions. But first, I would like to I have congratulations to relay to Mr. Dubourg, our chair, because this is really an extremely interesting meeting, the one we're having. And through you, I wish to thank our analysts for having found these 4 excellent panelists. And I do congratulate Ms. Lattanzio for having initiated this study on the pandemic. I think that this afternoon we are showing to what extent, when the committee is in full flight, we were able to catch up. I wouldn't say the time lost, but the time behind us. So we're looking to the future, looking forward. And I would like to say this. First of all, this is a very distressing situation that we're being presented today with regard to the Canadian government's reaction to the pandemic. And it's troubling, I must say. Ms. Cardinal, you were quoted by my colleague Joël Godin, the MP from Portneuf. We talk a lot about the Official Languages Act that's 52 years old, but in 1988, we mustn't forget it was improved. And yesterday he quoted you to say that we had to give teeth to the Official Languages Act. And I would like to ask you, how could we go about modernizing the Official Languages Act in that context and in a broader pan-governmental context? We stated earlier it's a quasi-constitutional act that must or that should supersede other acts and other departments, Treasury Board or whatever. So I would like to hear you on this. But you were all very captivating. I'm thinking here of Ms. Chouinard's presentation. She told us that official languages were set aside during the pandemic, and official languages must be part of our autopilot mechanism. So first to you, Ms. Cardinal, and I would also like to hear Ms. Chouinard to know how in the context of a modernization of the Act or the government structures, how might we go about inserting all these predispositions in order that a crisis not be a revealing agent of a problem with regard to the very foundations of the Official Languages Act? Thank you very much for your question. It is a very broad one, indeed. When I say that we have to give teeth to the Official Languages Act, well, I was thinking of one of your former colleagues, Senator Jean-Robert Gaultier. That's what he always said. And when he led his reform in 2005, in order for the government to take positive, proactive measures to ensure the development of official language minority communities, he said that we had to give teeth to the Official Languages Act. So when I say that, I'm thinking of Mr. Gaultier. There were consultations, very important consultations, led by Minister Joly with Canadians. And in this context, broad recommendations were made. Indeed, in order to give teeth to the Act, the Federation of Francophone and Acadian Communities of Canada said, for example, we had to grant management of official languages to a central organization. They asked for bilingualism on the federal court. They asked for the reinforcement of the right of public servants to work in the official language of their choice. I think we could go back to everything that was said during those consultations and go back to all of the proposals that were made. And in there is an awful lot of material that could reinforce the Official Languages Act. Just take all of the recommendations of the Commissioner for Official Languages made since the office of the Commissioner was set up. Some of them were put in place, and right there you have the tools to reinforce the Official Languages Act. An awful lot of proposals are being discussed. We have to assess them all, but there are very good proposals circulating that would allow us to reinforce this act. With my colleague, Martin Normand, we published a work in the context of an initiative taken by the University of Ottawa, and the idea was to reinforce the Official Languages Act. And if there's one thing that I would emphasize, it's the lens. Ensure that in all of government's operations, all of the Canadian government's operations, we have a lens for official languages, a francophone lens, to ensure that the policies of the Canadian government do respect the legal framework, the legal and constitutional framework for official languages. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Cardinal. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. And thank you for the comments you made at the beginning. I now give the floor to Ms. Lalonde for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you once again to each and every one of our witnesses. Thank you for your presence, and thank you for having taken the time in your very busy schedules to be with us. Before beginning, I would like to congratulate very publicly Ms. Cardinal, who is now the new regional director for AUF Amérique. So I wanted to salute you and congratulate you for this new mandate. I have all sorts of questions. For us in Orleans, it's a very important issue. The gaps in the government's decisions. I was very proud to see Minister Joly come out and state, listen, I can't quote her directly, but she was saying this is unbelievable. She was in full agreement that we should do better and that we must find solutions. The very raison d'etre of our study right now is at the bottom of this. And I would like to talk with Mr. Larocque, and you're all welcome to intervene. During this pandemic, we're realizing that with regard to our legislation for emergency measures and others, and I was very interested in what was stated by our witnesses, the idea being to draft new legislative measures to outline what we might do. Often departments work in silos, and that's what has happened with this pandemic. So, Mr. Larocque, you might be able to help me perhaps see what we could do with regard to creating regulations or combining measures. I think I know what you're going to respond, but I would like to hear you on this file in particular with regard to the Emergency Measures Act and the Official Languages Act, the preamble. Develop that for me, please. With pleasure. We must remember that the Emergency Measures Act was called the War Measures Act as well, and it was modernized in 1988. We mustn't forget that. It was modernized a week before the adoption of the Second Official Languages Act, again in 1988. So Parliament had those two acts there in 1988. It was a missed opportunity, to my mind, that those two were not meshed together. It would have been possible, but it's easy to say this in hindsight, but it would have been possible and desirable to mesh the two, and we can do it now. Under the Emergency Measures Act, there is an explicit mention of the respect and the primacy of the Official Languages Act. Or that should be the case. To respond to Mr. Blaney's question, the Official Languages Act is already quasi-constitutional, and its primacy is already confirmed in the Act in Clause 82. By virtue of this special status of the Act, it would be important that its primacy be reflected in acts such as the Emergency Measures Act, and it should also be invoked when special measures are adopted, such as the emergency measures relating to COVID, the measures adopted in April, in order that everyone have the reflex to do what my colleague mentioned earlier. We have to integrate this in the autopilot mode. On my linguistics course, I explained this to my students. With the Charter in 82, when we made Canada a bilingual country, we took the Official Languages Act of 69 and we included it under the Constitution. And in essence, we made bilingualism part of the DNA of Canada, to such an extent that when Canada catches a cold, it must sneeze in both languages. And that is somewhat the automatic reflex that I would hope for Canada in this new act, Official Languages Act. But how do we link this with what the provinces do? Because they're in charge of providing instructions. And I would say that here in Orleans, several people, because of the provincial government, the Ford government, they were watching French news dealing with the situation in Quebec. So it was awful because everyone was confused, everyone was lost. And I here have a very educated community, but these were vulnerable, francophone, new immigrants, etc., who were listening to the news in French coming from Quebec. Sorry, maybe we'll be able to come back to this question later. Thank you, Ms. Lalonde. Forgive me, Mr. Larocque. We don't have any more time.
15 minutes.
We have 15 minutes left before the end of this sitting. I know our discussions are very interesting, as are our debates. In order for all parties to be able to speak, the next round will be 4 minutes for each party. Here is the list. Mr. Généreux, Ms. Martinez-Ferrada, Mr. Beaulieu, and Ms. Ashton. So I will now begin a 4-minute round with Mr. Généreux. Go ahead. Thank you, Chair. Thanks once again to the witnesses for being here. It really is truly interesting. I want to come back to Ms. Chouinard once again. So your opening speech was very, very punchy. You said that public health posed a risk to vulnerable populations. And Ms. Lalonde is saying that in her riding, there are a lot of people who are educated, etc. But I think that this affects all Canadians, unless I'm mistaken. Yes, I think it affects more vulnerable people, seniors. But this public health issue, this incapacity, well, I saw what happened in Joliette. And not in French, not in English, but in another language, someone passed away because the person wasn't understood in their own language. It could have been in English or in French. It wasn't in these circumstances, but it just goes to show. Because in Joliette, this hospital was used to receiving clients, or patients rather, from the Indigenous community. So whether it be in Orleans or anywhere else in a minority, Francophone minority community, these are important issues. Do you have concrete examples or cases that were true cases that were reported to you on that? Thank you, Mr. Généreux. I think that's the same direction Ms. Lalonde was going in. In Ontario, right at the beginning of the pandemic, there were a series of examples where communications from the government weren't available in French, or where the Franco-Ontarian population of all ages turned on Radio-Canada, and we only heard François Legault's press conferences. It was a real problem. So people had to really navigate and search to find the right information elsewhere. In the article that Martin and myself wrote, we talked about other languages too, including Ms. Echequan, who of course was an Indigenous language speaker. And I know that that goes beyond the official languages scope here. We've come back to the question of the provincial level and how the federal government can clarify information with the provincial governments. I know there's no one on this committee from the Green Party, but I would like to briefly touch on the proposal of Annamie Paul that the federal government could have acted as a leader, could have tried to get the provinces to coordinate better and work together better so that communications to Canadians were clearer. I think that this is worth looking into, even though the health isn't under federal jurisdiction. There could have been an opportunity there to create a hub or a central point to make health communications available in both official languages, Mr. Généreux. Coming from Canada, not necessarily coming from Quebec, I know that that might bother Mr. Beaulieu, but that means that Quebec was useful for the rest of Canada, so I'm sure he'll be pleased with that. That's just a little joke. What you just said is so fundamental. The importance of being able to communicate in both official languages at any time, in any situation, especially in the realm of health, is something so essential in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Généreux. Pardon me, Ms. Chouinard, but the time was up. It is now time for me to give the floor to Ms. Martinez-Ferrada for the next 4 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would also like to thank all of our panelists here. As my colleague Mr. Blaney was saying, it is fascinating to hear you speak to these issues. I would like to come back to health and my colleague Ms. Lalonde's question to give you a chance to expand on that. There are situations where the federal government does work together with provincial governments in many different departments, but how do we go above and beyond just giving the example, or setting the example rather? And I would also like to ask Mr. Larocque or Ms. Cardinal about organizational culture and the way that we view official languages. So beyond laws, how do we achieve that cultural shift so that something that is innate in what we do to make that change in something so innate in what we do as a government? And I would like to come back to your suggestion that the important health positions be held by people who are bilingual. We understand that because we have supported Supreme Court justices being bilingual. So do you think that senior officials in the government should also be bilingual? Go ahead, Ms. Chouinard or Mr. Larocque. Ms. Chouinard. Yes. This is a discussion that's been going on for some time on the justices. The NDP bill brought back the importance for federal agencies to be able to communicate with Canadians in both official languages. But the job of the Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, it seems like an anomaly that her title, not her position rather, not be a bilingual one. And we've been asking this question since the beginning of March. So are there other positions that have been overlooked and that should be bilingual? Probably so. I wouldn't be able to give you a list of them right away. I know that Supreme Court justices should be, that goes without saying. But it would be interesting to look into that, especially in the context of a crisis. I would like to talk about the organizational culture shift. In fact, that's what I was going to speak to. Something that we haven't brought up yet is something that came out in social media, and it is that many public servants feel like they're losing their right to work in the language of their choice, because technically they should have the right to. The tendency seems just to be to use English because it's easier. But there are multidisciplinary teams and working groups, but unfortunately, the tendency is just to use English. Sound quality is not adequate at this time. We need to ensure that in coordination, in organizational culture, and in coordination with different levels of government, that bilingualism takes its proper place. Thank you, Mr. Normand. 4 minutes now to Mr. Beaulieu. I would like for Ms. Cardinal to finish the answer she started. As I was saying, if the trend continues, there will be fewer and fewer Francophones and fewer bilingual people. Do you think that that could lead to difficulties in finding the people who would be able to offer services in French? Ms. Cardinal. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. You're absolutely right. In the Canadian society, and through the work of the federal government, among others, it is absolutely necessary to preserve this essential need for people to receive services in both official languages. Quebec has a key role to play in promoting French in North America. The fact that Quebec prepared a guide for Francophones outside of Quebec also reflects its will to get closer to Francophones outside of Quebec. But the federal government also has a leadership role to play to ensure a real link between French and English in Canada. I would like to come back to one topic. It may be helpful for your study. You're all working on a study, and we're very much looking forward to reading it. There is a need to support research and fact-based data. And there is a lot of work missing. Provincial government have spoken about the patient safety and services offered to patients in both official languages. And it has been shown that if a person is not served in their language of choice, they may be erroneously diagnosed. If you're in a minority context, it can be very helpful for a healthcare provider to be able to speak French. If I say I have my heart hurts in English, that's an expression in French that doesn't mean I'm having a heart attack, but in English it does. So it's very important for people to be able to get the care that they require. It's very important for people to be properly understood. In our research, we also see that language is also important for healing after someone has been treated already. So when I say that language is a matter of public health and safety, well, these are research-based examples that show that we can't take this lightly. And now to come back to Ms. Martinez's question, there should be a Francophone lens. There should be a cultural shift with an action plan. Former action plans took aim at departmental plans, but now what we really need is to look at the ability of public servants to work in the language of their choice, even if they choose to work in French. And Mr. Mendelssohn's report is very interesting. You may wish to consult it. It's a very good report, and it raises it suggests some very worthwhile avenues. It looks at the situation of Francophones who work in the public service. People are afraid to express themselves in French because they think it will hold them back from promotions, for example. And now, when it comes to artificial intelligence and machine translation, if a report is written in French, it takes 3 minutes to be translated into English. Thank you, Ms. Cardinal. Now it is Ms. Ashton's turn for the next 4 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Larocque, Ms. Cardinal, Ms. Chouinard, you tabled a report at the last study on the modernization of the Official Languages Act in 2008. 2008, rather, and 2009. The committee has 2018 to 2019, and we believe that it is time for the government to act. We think that the white paper is a dilatory tactic and is going to delay the tabling of the bill. Yesterday, it was confirmed in the House that a new round of consultation would be kicked off. What do you have to say about the work that the committee has done on the modernization of the Act? And do you think that that consultation that has already been done was sufficient for the government to be able to table a bill? And what update, given the health crisis, should be called for?
Monsieur Larocque,
Mr. Larocque, I believe that the consultations that have already taken place are amply sufficient to prepare a bill. I believe that the government has at its disposal the data necessary to prepare a bill that could be well debated in Parliament. I believe that legislators must take into account our discussions of today and reports like the ones that we here are preparing, my colleagues appearing here alongside me. But I don't think that the publication of a white paper should postpone a bill, if that's your question, Ms. Ashton. Thank you, Mr. Larocque. Ms. Chouinard, Ms. Cardinal, if you have something to add. Very quickly, I agree with Mr. Larocque. If the white paper is the opportunity to anchor the modernization of the Official Languages Act in broader reflection on the place of official languages within the Canadian apparatus, then that would be a broader discussion impacting upon other regulations and acts. And I'm anxious to see what Minister Joly is preparing with regard to a white paper, but it won't prevent the modernization of the Official Languages Act. Your committee and the Senate Official Languages Committee have already done in-depth work on the modernization of this act. I would just add something. The consultations that have taken place thus far and the reports that have been published are very important, but there's a new element here. It's the place of French in Quebec, which, when the consultations began a few years ago, wasn't part of the equation. And I stated this several times. I even published this in Le Devoir. I said that if Quebec doesn't participate in this exercise, then it'll be confirmed that the Official Languages Act is an act just for official languages. But it's a broad Canadian act. It's an act for all Canadians, including Quebecers. So if we must wait a little bit so as to ensure that the new act the Official Languages Act and all of the stakeholders in Canada adhere to what will be presented, I believe that we could very well welcome a white paper which will allow for a dialogue around the reform of the Official Languages Act, but one doesn't exclude the other. Clearly, the white paper must be followed by an Official Languages Act, and let's hope that we won't have to wait for the next elections in order to see this new reinforced Official Languages Act. Thank you very much. If you'll allow me just to add one element, I would add this. Faced with the urgency to act, several federal and provincial institutions have innovated with this emergency situation and have brought up into play new technologies, and I think we have to seize upon this opportunity to improve the delivery of services to Francophones who are isolated in remote areas, in minority situations where they have difficulty obtaining services in French. So that, too, is an opportunity to seize upon, and we have to reflect upon this as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Normand. Thank you to Ms. Ashton. Listen, that is all the time we have. I sincerely thank all of our witnesses, first of all, for having made themselves available with such short notice. It was extremely interesting, this meeting, so thank you to Ms. Linda Cardinal, Emeritus Professor, University of Ottawa, Professor Stephanie Chouinard, Department of Political Science, Royal Military College of Canada, Department of Political Studies, Queen's University, Mr. François Larocque, Professor, Faculty of Law, Common Law Section, University of Ottawa, and Mr. Martin Normand, Postdoctoral Fellow, University of Ottawa. And I also wish to thank all of our staff, all of the personnel. I add my voice to that of Mr. Blaney to say that they've done wonderful work. So, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting now, point of order, Mr. Blaney. Inaudible for the interpreter. Inaudible. The sound is not coming through. Very quickly, Mr. Blaney. Very quickly, Mr. Chairman.
My colleague, Mr. Mazier, would have had some questions prepared for the witness that he could not ask. Through you, Mr. Chair, I would ask if it was possible for Mr. Mazier to carry his questions to you so he could get answers from the witness, the excellent panel we had today.
Yes, exactly, Mr. Benet, for sure. So Mr. Mazier just sent it to me or to the clerk, so we will ask the witnesses if they can reply to that. So, merci tout le monde.
Thank you all. This meeting now stands adjourned. Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Merci.
Merci tout le monde.